You know, Dara, as I look back on my life, when I was younger, I always wanted to be a monk, but unfortunately I never got the chance. Got the chance.
That took me a second.
Yeah.
I'm glad you actually paused it out for me there.
Yeah.
That I don't know how to respond to that.
Sorry, dude. I'm so sorry. It's a terrible joke.
The fact that it took me so long to get it. We can blame that on my lack of comprehension skills.
I get it, man. I get the whole thing. But truthfully, even that joke, do I tell this one? Nah, I have to. It's so bad. But hey, everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This, a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. So joining me in discourse today is photographer, writer, traveler, one of the co-creators of the Sigil engine, and host of one of my favorite podcasts around right now, Spirit Box Podcast, of which I am a proud Patreon supporter. I'm joined by the one and only Darragh Mason. Dara, how are you?
I'm great, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm really delighted to be here, and obviously I'm a proud patron of yours, so I'm doubly happy to be here.
I was on your show a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that.
And 2 weeks ago,
I had such a blast. I said, Dara, I have to have you on the show. It's been a long time since we were like, we'll be on each other's show kind of thing. And months passed, but we made it and we're here. So with this episode, I want people to know that this is going to be a bit more conversational than most of my episodes of What Magic Is This, because I think that we're going to be talking about a topic that a lot of people are probably very interested in. It gets a little bit more philosophical than magical, I think, at some points in this episode. But here's how it happened. When I asked Dara about this show, I said, Dara, what topics do you want to talk about? And you said, oh man, there's one thing that I really want to talk about. I want to talk about self-transformation, which, to be fair, surprised me a little bit, because you're not known, but in a way, people ask you to talk about certain things. They'll be like, hey, when are you going to talk about Jen? When are you going to talk? And so when you said self-transformation, I was like, interesting. Very interesting. What is it about this topic that interests you, that you feel it's worthy of talking about?
Well, I think that the real starting point for me is when I was thinking about your show and the great guests you have, and indeed kind of your vast body of knowledge on magic and the different subjects and territories within. I started to kind of think about our conversation when you were on Spirit Box, and afterwards I was really contemplating kind of, why do we get into magic? And really, I came to the answer really quickly. Yeah. For me, it was about, I want to understand the world around me.
Right.
But ultimately, for that, when I think about the world around me, is trying to understand myself, my place in it.
Right.
But magic is a tool set. When we talked about that kind of, one of your entry points was Grant Morrison's famous talk on sigil magic, and it was exactly the same for me.
Really?
But what did I get out of that sigil magic talk? Was like, that's a method that I can apply some kind of control, that I can game the system. I'm less of kind of like someone in a life jacket at the behest of the tides. I can maybe manipulate things. I can move in this space.
Right.
And ultimately, where that gets me to is like exploring those devices. Magic as a technology is the famous bit he talks about in that bit is like, you can't do a sigil to win the lottery and then not buy a lottery ticket. You got to buy a lottery ticket. Mm-hmm. And that for me is the allegory of like, well, if I want to change something, I can't just do a sigil and go, right, that's it. That's my bit done. It's what do I need to do? And really through kind of looking at my own journeys, my own experiments in magic, successes and failures, it started to help me kind of look back with perspective on my experiences.
Right.
And through that, really start to kind of understand myself a bit more and understand myself in an honest way, which isn't always great. It's kind of like, I do that, or that's why that relationship went wrong.
Right.
And actually that person was wonderful and I messed it up, and you start to understand that stuff.
Right.
I think that's what it gave me. Magic gave me a little bit of like a topography on my life,
right,
on what I was experiencing, what I was reacting to, and what I was missing. It definitely one part, but a significant part of the puzzle for me. It's like those games. Those games where like most of the map is obfuscated, and then as you wander around, it starts to reveal more. Right. That's kind of how I see a lot of kind of explorations into magic, and in a wider sense, kind of the paranormal.
For sure. For a lot of people, they seem to think that map is always going to be, they'll have the little area, it's uncleared, but it'll still be blurry for them. Mm-hmm. And I think for some of us, we come to magic with an understanding that it might clear some of that up, that we can see a bit more of that territory. Mm-hmm. I love that as an example, Dara. That's really wonderful. I have to ask, how would you personally define something like self-transformation?
I think it's fundamentally the process of introspective change. And really separating it from the external world. Yeah. In a lot of ways, my own sense of self-transformation, my own sense of becoming something different was entirely detached from the world.
Yeah.
So the process of self-transformation for me really was I saw myself in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. To get to that point, there would have been external elements. There would have been external elements that like travel, certain magical experiences, some that I sought and some that happened.
Right.
They can be those catalyst events that can trigger those things. But so self-transformation for me is part kind of like seeing myself in a totally different way, in a way that I'm not faking, in a way that I believe, at my core, mm-hmm. that actually how I see myself is different. And it's not a fake it till you make it think, it's a real thing.
Yeah. I like the term that you used, that you said some introspection, because a lot of people, I think, when they think of this idea of self-transformation, it's at least registering, at least taking that first step to being able to say, I can actually look at myself honestly, and there's things that I don't like about myself, and I can actually change them. I received an email recently about somebody who basically says, and I hope I'm not putting them on the spot, because it was a really lovely email, but it says like, I'm a materialist and I know magic is fake. I'm horribly depressed. I can't see a way out. And I just had to reply like, well, guess what? You've taken the first step, man. You're at least able to say that you're stuck and you're not feeling good. So you cotting on to this idea of being able to have an honesty with yourself and a willingness to change is fundamental. Would you agree with this? Yeah, I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it fundamentally is. Like there's parallel tracks. And it's like, as I was saying earlier, that like that journey into introspection often happens through how you see the outside world and what you experience in the outside world. And for me, the biggest thing from magic, the biggest thing that you can get from magic is it completely destroys the way you see the world.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental protein in which your self-transformation will find.
Definitely. As I was saying to you before we had the mics on and we were recording, that this is an episode that I should have done way earlier. And I'm super glad that you brought this up, Dara, because when I started the podcast, I had earlier concepts, things like consciousness and symbols, really low ball topics, just to be able to get a bit of a foundation for the stuff that was going to come later when I start talking about doing magic with dead people and animals. But I'm super glad that you brought this up as a topic, because I think a lot of people that get into magic, they don't really do so for purely magical reasons and are looking for something like self-transformation instead. Mm-hmm. So do you see that there is a separation between doing, say, more historical notions of magic than just purely getting into magic for self-transformation? Is there a distinction, do you think?
I think there absolutely is. I think the initial runs into magic are generally the point of self-transformation is a subconscious goal. It's a subconscious need through which kind of pursuit of magical endeavors will get you there, as a lot of other routes will. But if you look at kind of what people's first endeavors are with magic, everyone's done the sigil for the person they're extremely attracted to, or the one that is looking for wealth.
Right.
So we unpack that for a second as to, well, what do those particular spells mean? Mm-hmm. Wealth, that changes my life, or money comes to me. It removes a problem, or it changes my circumstances. Love, or something less highbrow but equally engaging, is again is around a transformative thing.
Yeah.
You're looking to transform your circumstances.
Yeah.
Wanting to transform your circumstances, that's the branch. You track that branch all the way back to the root, and it's ultimately coming back to yourself, your sense of who you are and what you're capable of.
Right.
You know, and using magic as a tool to change what you're capable of experiencing, of having in your life. And I think as people get more and more into it, and kind of you get a few things and you get a few failures, and you study more, and you start to kind of get more of I guess the knowledge that comes with experience.
Right.
Those things start to fade away. People start to do magic in a totally different sense. You can still dip into kind of that stuff to help grease the wheels of life, absolutely, you know. But people come to it looking for deeper things.
For sure. I think most people start off with this idea of the deeper things of magic. But if you'll allow me to get on a little bit of a soapbox here for a second, Dara, I think that we've been doing magic forever. I think for as long as we've been conscious and known that we've been allowed to do magic, we've been doing magic. The notion that magic is a tool purely for self-transformation is a fairly new one. And people might disagree with me on this. Totally cool. I think it can basically, in a way, be traced back to Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, specifically in his third book of occult philosophy. But part 1 and part 2 are kind of natural magic, and then celestial magic. And then in part 3, that's ritual magic. And Agrippa himself, he reframes all ritual magic as seeking divine truths through spiritual experience, right? And that's kind of like where a lot of our notions of what ritual magic actually means. Whereas this was not done before. There were small glimpses of it through things like the Ars Notoria or things like Liber Gratis or whatnot. But it's really Agrippa that we can kind of look at and see is like, okay, so he saw that these divine truths about yourself, and in a way, this religious aspect of it is an important thing. We also did this thing where he took from Ficino an idea of the magician and their self-worth and their self-enlightenment to be at the center of ritual magic. The biggest fan of Agrippa was it was the Golden Dawn, basically. And the Golden Dawn did this thing where they took mystery, tradition, religion, and magic, and they just kind of smushed more so mystery and more mysticism and mystery and magic together. So I think people, when they come to magic, they think that this idea of self-transformation is at the root of magic, when truthfully, historically, it really wasn't. But do you think that this is like a positive development? Do you think that, or a necessary development?
Yeah, I mean, I can only really speak enough from a personal perspective, you know, and I think anything that helps you transform into something better is a positive development. I certainly kind of look at the process of transformation. I mean, I use magic as a term in a ludicrously broad sense,
right?
You know, so like kind of all hermetics and alchemy is all folded in there,
right?
For me, you know, and when I think of the transformation process, I guess in its most literal sense, I think very much in terms of the alchemical processes.
Yeah.
You know, of Negrido and through to kind of Rubido. How I've mythologized myself and my own life, you know, I see that as reflecting of chapters.
Okay.
And that's how I interpret it. Like anybody's internal world, it's a complete mess. But, you know, and it only makes sense to me. But I see those metaphors as very much transferable and overlayable into the process of self-transformation. Negrido being like the dark night of the soul,
right?
And the other stages until you get to that kind of Rubido, you know, the process of getting into oneness,
right?
And really kind of knowing oneself, the end of the great work, as it were. You know, the thing is, for me though, I don't believe there is an end.
Okay.
To the great work. I don't think we ever are the finished article.
Okay.
You know, that's a personal belief, because I think there's always space for growth and change. And I think we're always going through lessons. And I think the stages of our lives as we physically change, offer new learning experiences. As we change, the world starts to belong to younger generations. You see things in a different way. I think that's how I see it from like a broad, sweeping, magical context. That's the philosopher's stone. That metaphor has always been dear to me. I've always seen kind of the process of change in there. I think that idea of the changing of how the fire of experience, of personal tragedy, of personal apocalypse changes you. Mm-hmm. That's always resonated with me. Mm-hmm. The sense of being the raw ore in the crucible, and being extracted through the process of the fire of experience, or the alchemical, hermetical, magical fire of however you're exploring your life, or exploring the limitations of the material world to get to the borders. Yeah, that's always been a metaphor that's been close to me. Mm-hmm. The fire, though, is often the real world, and the experience it throws at you. To quote your metaphor as well about from the last time we spoke about the pottery being repaired with gold. Mm-hmm. It's getting very alchemical in terms of the materials we're discussing, but I think that's the same process. You know, it's through experience. There's a process of extraction. Right. That process of kind of melting of being in the crucible, it can take years for you to process, like challenges. It can take years for you to understand them. And I think that's one of the things that kind of experience in magic, or again, speaking experience in the paranormal, where my understanding of reality has changed, where my understanding of what things being solid mean, the fundamental rules of the world, when those things break, when those things go and you experience that personal apocalypse, like when we spoke before, I mentioned seeing a column of gas and little blue lights sparkling, like moving across my room. So there was some sort of like, that was one of those things that was like, well, this in the space of 20 seconds, my understanding of what's real has completely changed. Right. I've seen something, I don't know what it is, but it's broken the rules. Yeah. It's broken how, the very strict margins of reality were broken. Right. And that changes everything. When you start to pull that thread, it can change everything. But I mean, it depends on your personality, caveat. But you could just walk away from that.
Some people, though, they don't get those experiences all the time. Even still, though, they feel like there's something missing. So why do you think that most people get stuck and feel in some way that moving towards something different in how they see themselves and engage differently with the world? Because you said that a lot of where you get your stimulus for transformation comes from the real world. My question is, why do you think we're so stuck at this age? I mean, it's such a broad philosophical question, but we're all hurting units at this point. You don't meet a lot of really well-adjusted people that are fine, that don't want to change their life.
My view on that is that they truthfully fear the change, and that actually there's elements of comfort in what you know. There's also that aspect of oneself, that bit of you, that version of you that you want to metamorphosize from. Will hang on for dear life. It doesn't want to die. Mm-hmm. That's why it's so hard. Yeah. That's why it's brutal in places. And I think this is why I talk about it also never being the finished thing, because there's periods of advancement, there's periods of progress, and there's periods of regression. There's periods, of defeat. In my view, ultimately those periods of defeat, they're periods of progression in disguise, because you learn to process and again, as we said, to be able to see the topography of it, to look down at it all, in a bird's eye view and see how it fits. That's where I found that when the rules broke, when spirits started to be part of my life and be real, the rules broke. Once I was able to process that, it was very liberating. It was equally frightening because I didn't know what the hell was going on, but but it was liberating because the constraints of a world that I found very narrow, just 2D and all magnolia, just magnolia walls for everywhere,
Right.
and magnolia wall and carpet tiles. That was it. That was the space it was in. Confined by the rules and restrictions of how our society works and how kind of the constraints of reality. If I'm honest with myself, I wanted magic. I wanted mystery.
Yeah.
And then experiencing things like that were very healing. We're hugely healing. As we discussed on Spirit Box, we both had our own challenges with mental health, and in a lot of ways, that's what I see as the crucible. That's the real challenging bit of many parts. But for me, it's been one of the real challenging parts of my life is surviving those periods of absolute defeat.
Yeah.
And when I talked about kind of knowing myself, right, and being more aware, is I'm not sinking down into those feelings of despair. I'm not sinking down into those feelings of hopelessness. I'm feeling them, I'm experiencing them, but I'm also, again, looking at the topography, looking back at the line of my life, going, this will pass. It'll pass. Just hang on, and that's been important, and understanding that things will pass, and that ability to reflect and kind of, even though you're not feeling it in any shape or form, to know that I just got to grind it out and tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be a new day.
Yeah.
That feeling and that experience comes from a lot of different things. It's not just things like persistence or learning persistence. It also comes from, like I said, knowing defeat. You get defeated in training in martial arts or sports or games, and it's like, it hurts momentarily or might be a bit ego crushing, but you're still there.
Yeah.
You're still there. And I think that's that realization of like, I'm still here.
Yeah.
If you can get to that place, knowing like tomorrow's a different day and I'll still be here, and this will pass over me, is so important. And I'm like, that for me is probably totally outside the realms of magical practice, and maybe has nothing to do with it at all. But the meditative practices that you would practice, various different forms of magic, certainly gave me that space of calming, when you get the kind of the storms in your heads of I call it your mind losing shape,
right,
and being able to kind of pull it back together. Certainly, tools you learn about magic can help with that.
Yeah.
But it's that knowing it, I recognize this.
Dara, why do you think that people feel so stuck right now, though? Not a lot of people are happy.
There's a lot of misery.
Over the last year, the amount of mental health checks I've had to do with friends is just, it's insane. People aren't good right now. And like yourself and myself, I would hope that things don't have to break before they get better. So do you have any kind of a theory as to why? Could it be that we're just not as spiritual as we used to be, or we don't value the things like self-enlightenment or betterment or introspection as we should in certain societies? Like, what do you think it is, man?
Well, I think yes, absolutely. That you've painted there, I agree with completely. We are detached from spirituality, in a lot of ways, which I think has a lot got to do with the resurgence or this explosion of interest in magic and witchcraft and different expressions of the esoteric. Definitely, I think is related to that. There's a clawing for meaning.
Yeah.
The clawing for meaning is a big thing here.
Right.
Because when you look at lockdown, when you look at kind of how, again, we're using the terms again, how the rules changed, right? So like we have the margins of kind of what you're supposed to do, how the world works are broken down and narrowed. Yeah. And it's like, well, you're restricted in your movement, you're restricted from human contact. And we're all kind of working remotely and on Zoom calls all the time. There's benefits to that in the sense, nobody enjoyed commuting and that kind of stuff. That was not a lot of fun. No. When we're talking about kind of human contact, we're not really describing being on a stuffed commuter train, right? That's not what we're talking about. No. We're talking about kind of like that an emotional connection. Those small connections of exchanges that you have with people throughout your day, and they're gone.
Yeah.
But we're now we're in a substitute world where it's always on.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem as well. We're in an always on world. We're in an overstimulated world.
Yeah.
I think that has an effect on our brain, on how we see things. And that idea of like constant stimulation, some of it good, some of it bad. It ultimately, we're ingesting that kind of stuff. There's platforms that kind of we're all on that in some way encourage negative behavior.
Yeah.
You know? And I don't think you can really be on some of those platforms without that having an impact on you.
Right.
You know, it's like the conflict you see or outbursts of negative emotions and what have you. It's like they start to kind of stick to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that doesn't give people respite. So, you know, it's like I'm at home, I might be locked in somewhere, and I don't have the ability to go out or escape a place without being exposed to negativity. You know, I mean, not all the time. There's some great things, that we can find on kind of platforms. I think a lot of our communities are collectively behave kind of like a hungry ghosts. And, you know, and sometimes pull negative behavior out of people.
I agree with absolutely all of that. And I brought him up on your show, but the best summation I see is as to why we're kind of in the state that we're in. It is a very simplified explanation, but it is one that I think as a model it is very useful, is the one from The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, in which our brains, they used to work a little bit more in tandem, the hemispheres of the brain. And one hemisphere, specifically the left hemisphere, which is very detail-oriented. It is very much about what. It is about picking things apart and paying very focused attention on things and about minute stuff, is now the quadrant from which all of our thought and actions and art and everything come from this one hemisphere. Whereas the right hemisphere is open and it's broad and it's accepting of things. And it's I'm just going to say, it's the far more spiritual and meaning making part of the brain. And I'm not trying to reduce everything into brain hemispherics here. I just want people to understand that. But I think that at a certain point, the first steps for myself, the first steps of going into this wonderful numinous was to realize that the what world, I'm just going to say that, the what detail-oriented world didn't fit for me. And it never fit for me. So eventually I moved into a more philosophical why world, let's just put it that way, which was a little bit better. Since then, I've moved into a how world. I'm more interested in seeing how things fit together and work together, and it's a bit more organic and it's a bit more free-flowing. And I agree with you, this constant need for details leaves out just a lot of meaning out of our lives. And it's been said many times, we are meaning-making machines. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that meaning is inherent in the world, like in everything. Meaning is already there, right? It's this need to what-ify that meaning, to think that we can pick it like a flower out of the world. No, the whole world is a bloody flower. And I know that sounds like really, really simplified, but I do think that trying to shift our perceptions are important, and to stop looking at things like the what of absolutely everything and try and move yourself into the how of things, which is why I think a lot of people, when they get into magic, they really want to concentrate on the philosophical side of magic. And I've made it very plaintively clear that I'm not a huge fan of the term occult philosophy, because in some ways I think that philosophy isn't a bit detrimental. I've moved well into the area of the kind of strange social sciences. I like anthropology. Dr. Tim Ingold calls anthropology philosophy, but with the people left in. But
I like that.
Yeah, it's great. But seeing the how, I think concentrating on the how is very, very important. All of these issues are very individualized. And when you start with magic, you're going to get a lot of things telling you, and this word comes up constantly, and is that it's the ego, and magic is best achieved when you've gotten rid of the ego. But what does this idea of ego serve, do you think, for self-transformation, Dara?
I mean, I think it's getting rid of misconceptions about yourself.
Yeah.
The ego reacts, the ego obsesses, the ego measures itself against others. The ego tends to tell you about what you don't have to the detriment of yourself, and what you do have to the detriment of others. I don't mean this as glibly as it's going to sound, but rather than just kind of being in oneself, the reaction to what others say. If someone says, you said something really stupid, Dara, which happens all the time.
I hope not, Dara.
Well, I mean, I say
I'll fight him
all the time.
Tell me who. I've got my notepad right here. Tell me who. Where do they live?
But most of the time, I might be hurt by that. Before, previously I would be like quite hurt by that, and I go like, whatever. Now I probably just laugh because I'm like, yeah, I probably did, but that's and I'll probably do it again. And again, and that's not saying I'm the finished article, but
Right.
I'm detached from that part
Yeah.
of my ego because that's a moment in time. It's someone else reacting to something I've said. It doesn't define me.
No.
It doesn't define them either. That's why I find that funny. Actually, one of the wonderful things that has happened to me, is that through, again, kind of like some of the experiences I've had with the gin work I've gone through and kind of all the kind of travel work, is I just find a lot of stuff preposterously funny. And that's been hugely liberating.
Very much so.
Because, again, it kind of pulls you out of the moment and you're looking at things from a topographical way.
Yeah.
And occasionally I've had these moments of lucidity, and particularly where I'm in those points of where I'm like, I'm in some sort of emotional turmoil, or there's something that is tremendously emotionally potent happening. And I remember having this experience one time where I was walking through the town where I lived at the time, and I was really in this kind of, personal knot and cyclical thinking about this issue I had in a relationship at the time.
And weirdly,
oh, it's horrible. It's a horrible thing. Yeah. But I had this weird experience of like almost zooming out of myself. Zooming out like kind of, like a Google Maps in reverse. And kind of like seeing myself from like a much higher perspective.
Right.
And I just started laughing.
Okay.
Because I kind of observed myself in this kind of like massive, oh my God, everything's destroyed, and going like, it's just a moment in time. It's going to pass. And kind of like, as a parent would find your kid getting like massively wound up about someone has the piece of Lego they want. It's okay, it doesn't matter. It's all right,
Right.
It's that kind of happened that I was kind of like, whoa. Actually kind of just zoomed out from my own existence and was like, why am I worrying about this? This is just like, it's just a moment of time. It's going to pass.
Yeah.
That was a weird thing that happened. I
love it though.
And it's certainly not kind of like that happens every time there's any kind of emotional conflict or challenges. I still get those kickings like everybody else, But what it did give me is it is a sense of a residual sense of kind of what to care about, what to worry about. And that it kind of dialed that down, it contracted that. And that's a gift that I'm really grateful for, because I was a real thought chaser.
Yeah.
I could be gone for weeks chasing thoughts. How I kind of used to kind of define that is that experience that people have when they're in the shower and they're arguing with somebody from earlier on the day before or in preparation for the conflict they're expecting that day.
Yeah.
And you're going through it and you're like practicing your snappy lines.
Oh God, it never goes the way it's supposed to.
It never goes that way. And generally, you come in in your head, you rolled it out, and you're like, you're ready for combat.
Yeah.
You're like, and then it comes in and it happens, and you're actually like, I don't have the stomach for this. I'm like, can we just be friends?
Yeah.
Or it never pans out in that. But that cycle of kind of cyclical thinking is when you're in that cycle 24/7. When you can't get out of it, it's not boxed into the shower. It's like you're bump, 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 bump. You're running through it again. It's that obsessive, compulsive. If you say that, but that's how it certainly felt to me, where you can't let go.
No,
this is where I find that benefit of learning to know yourself and understand your mind. And as much of it that is hidden through them parts of the map that haven't revealed itself, but you start to know the shape of it. If you can keep them with the map metaphor, for me, it's being kind of like, okay, I'm lost in a landscape I don't know, to being, I'm pretty sure there's a mountain over there. Yeah. I'm going to head that way. Yeah. And that's, I think, it's through kind of journeying, and it's through kind of my own kind of experiences in magic and the broader kind of paranormal that it's given me those kind of navigational tools.
It's funny that I wonder if somebody could write a book about it's like a self-help psychology book using the paranormal and the supernatural, because you're totally right. Because At times, these things are incredibly weird, especially when they happen, especially something that's completely off the map. I mean, we'll use the Robert Anton Wilson terminology, chapel perilous, where you're just in a place where nothing makes sense. The territory it's unfamiliar. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes these experiences are there to kind of be like, okay, you know what? I think that there's something there to look towards. I can almost intuit that this is a direction that I need to go. Those are wonderful experiences when they happen. I just want to divert here for a second. Have you ever read a book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa?
No, I haven't.
So he's interesting because interesting character. I was suggested it by one of the Patreon patrons recently, and I had a chance to flip through it very quickly last night. But it's just this idea that constantly seeking this self-enlightenment is in itself a bit of a fruitless task, and it gets at base, it gets to a level where you are in some way a spiritual materialist. Like you think it's something that you can quantify it and capture, and which is interesting. But do you think that there's something wrong or deleterious about how we see ourselves, that we're constantly broken and we need fixing, and then perhaps reaching for magic is going to fix this? What do you think about this?
I totally do. Because it's another form of cyclical thinking.
Yeah.
Cyclical thinking might be the wrong term and all, but like it's you're spiritually chasing your tail.
Yeah.
It's like goal achievement.
Right.
We're constantly right. Okay, so I'm going to sit down. I'm going to write a book. Put all the time in. I've got a goal. I'm going to write the book. And you write the book, and you're like, okay, I've written a book. But what were you really looking to do when you wrote that book?
Right.
Is you're seeking to be the person. You've got a vision in your head of what I will be, the person I will be when I write that book. You have a vision in your head, different life. And that invariably doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You get to the point you're like, I'm the same person. I might have been more disciplined. Now I have a manuscript. Might be a good one, might be a bad one, but I have a manuscript. And like you've learned something. But then you have a void.
Right.
Then you drop off a cliff because you've achieved the goal. And if you haven't got anything else beyond that, I'm back in the place where there was an empty bit that I've tried to fill with a goal. When we get to that, and that's the thing I think with the idea of the quest for enlightenment, is that it implies a destination. And that's why I was saying that I don't believe there is a destination. Again, that's a personal perspective.
Right.
Because for me as a traveler, it's the journey. The material part of the journey, what that experience is like, and then the retrospective part of that journey, looking back over it. It's an interesting thing. I mean, like, what doesn't, when we talk about how we, particularly from the Western mind, when we perceive things, we tend to label them.
We do.
That's how we categorize progression and change. Nobody gave me there was no kind of certification I could get to say, right, you're a documentary travel photographer now.
Yeah.
Got a camera and went traveling, took pictures, sold them to agencies.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do. The main bit of how I did that was I started calling myself a photographer.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say there is that the perceptions of kind of destinations are generally just that. They're just perceptions.
Right.
It's the journey, because if you wrap everything up in kind of that goal, when you get it or when you don't get it, you fall inward because nothing's happened on the inside.
Right.
If you're focusing on the single point.
Yeah.
That's a personal observation. I'm saying that repeatedly in case everyone thinks that I'm saying.
Dara knows all. For me, the self-transformed being that I always want to be is always 5 steps ahead of me. And while people will consider that, well, what's the point of it all anyways? No, it's that's a feature. That's not a bug. That's the great part of it.
Yeah.
I like how you brought up travel, because from my understandings, you're a pretty well-traveled guy. What are some of the best vectors besides something like magic for something like self-transformation? You want to tell us a couple of travel stories? Because travel for me has been hugely important, right? Like it really gets you outside of yourself in some way, like outside of yourself in the sense that it allows you to see things that are different and wonderfully different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, certainly, like, travel is a huge one. It's been a massive one for me. The bit for me with travel is it changes the way you see.
Yeah.
And you see things, with new eyes. You see things like a child does. It's like the details on the buildings. There's certain ways that people wear their hair or clothes, that you see them really, really in a fresh new way. The really kind of helpful part of that kind of seeing the world completely new is you see how different things are in terms of the practices, beliefs, behaviors, everything. And again, that's a deconstruction of what you've grown up in. It's a deconstruction of what you believe the world is. It severs those ties of what is the way things are. And I think that's an important thing. So that's one of the big things I got from travel. It's like the understanding that people live in vastly different ways with completely different belief systems, completely different views of the world that are completely valid.
Right.
When I was a younger guy, I used to think the idea of an arranged marriage was, that seems insane to me. That's crazy.
Right.
It's crazy. Why? That's you just meet someone and then you're married. That's bonkers. It's nuts. And then when I actually was in a culture where that was the norm,
right.
And they were like, "You're just going to risk trying to meet somebody? You're like." You're going to try and why don't you just buy a lottery ticket? You might just be lucky. And that's insane. You're crazy. You're just going to gamble like that?
Yeah.
What if they're a bad match? No wonder you people keep getting divorced. So, it gave me the inverse.
Right.
That's an analogous to the whole experience of shifting the worldview. It's that shifting of the worldview that, for me, it's like that expands my horizons of what's possible.
Right.
And that, for me, the inward reflection of that, the inner world horizons change.
For sure.
Because then I think less about what I should be to what do I want to be? What can I be?
Yeah.
That's what it did for me. It kind of erodes the cementing factors of the conditions of where you grew up in, your family, your societal structure, your religious or non-religious, or whatever those things are around you that are your solid sense of this is who I am.
Right.
This is what I am. And those walls, they just had to chip away at that cement and ease one brick out, till there's that kind of wall that encircles who you are starts to break down in a good way.
Sure.
Magic is a factor in that. Travel was a massive one for me, because it was also a period of my life where I felt truly free.
Yeah.
And that's, I feel very, very lucky to have had that, where I'm like, I might go to this city today. I might find myself randomly on a rooftop in the city of Amritsar hanging out with Sikh martial artists, which happened, and the kind of the freedom of kind of, well, I might go this way, I might go that way, or I'll just wander around and explore and see and observe and be.
Yeah.
That state of being. And I think this comes back a little bit to, you talk about why are people so stressed at the moment, and why are people so, why is there so much suffering in terms of our mental health? Now, obviously, there's the huge array of complex factors that people are experiencing and going through that, and fundamentally it's a really hard fucking time, right? But for me, wandering around and observing and talking to people I was interested in, sometimes through such kind of limited language, where I have not a word of Hindi or I had one tiny bit of Hindi that I could introduce myself to people with, which is I say Mera Naam Dara Hai, which is like my name is Dara, and then I'd say Darragh Singh. And Darragh Singh is this really famous wrestler in India.
Okay.
Right? So when I'd be like, my name is Darragh, like Darragh Singh, and everyone's like, all right, So, but it was that was kind of what my kind of opening gambit, and then we kind of just chat, through whatever it was, and I would find myself just having cups of tea with random people, cups of chai with random people, just in the city of Amritsar and in the Punjab. I went looking for these Sikh martial artists, some of the guys I mentioned that I was earlier, and I found one of the local masters, and he took me to this lockup where they had all their weapons, and he was showing me all kind of the different weapons, and some of his practitioners were there doing this really cool thing. It was like a, I guess it's called a chakram. It's like a kind of a net with like a wheel in the middle, and you throw it up in the air and it spins and flails out, and it's quite dramatic looking. But the idea for this was to kind of just cause chaos and distraction, right? They would throw this into kind of oncoming forces.
Before the smoke bomb was invented.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. This was right by a little cobbler's place, and then the guys kind of, do you want to have a cup of chai? Sit down, and I'm like, oh, okay, lovely, and sit down, have a cup of chai, and then 2 minutes later, like a Nihang warrior walks in, and these are kind of, the guys you see with massive turbans and like the spears and really eloquent beards. This chap walked in and kind of I pointed on my camera, so kind of take your picture, and he's like, yeah, and kind of I direct posed him a little bit,
right?
And he posed for me, and I took his photograph, and like, that ended up being like a National Geographic photograph of the day, and like, got a bunch of awards for it. It was like out of nowhere, just this kind of raw organic moment. And I think, going back to kind of, again, why are people so unhappy? In my state then, when I was just kind of, wandering around with my camera and taking photographs of things I found interesting in, I felt like I was in my raw organic state.
Yeah.
I was in my raw organic state. Life was extremely simple, extremely simple. And I think that's the thing that we don't have. We don't have simple lives. No. We have the end of stimulation coming towards us from the areas where we go to engage and go to stimulate human contact, or simulate rather human contact.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're stimulated constantly by demands on our attention, and demands that are just tiny cuts of stress all the time. And I know the difference between me and that organic state, as I call it, kind of like my infant state, and my state where I'm back in the world, in society, that it's different. There's like a sub-frequency of pressure that people have, and I think we've had that for
I'd agree, yeah,
for a long time. And in this period of time, in this period of like where we're undergoing this compression and contraction, it feels like that's just being turned up. There's the periods of isolation. There's that lack of basic human contact. There's the inference of you must maintain distance, and all the kind of elements that go along with that of being masked, and all the necessary things that we've all had to go through. I think the psychological impact of that is profound, and it's accumulative, because it also takes away the hope of the future. There's the second bit of that. It's like, well, do you know what? I can hang off my holidays, and then I can jump on a plane and go somewhere beautiful and be in that organic state. And you can't do that.
No.
That goes.
I don't know if people can make the distinction, or at least I don't. I don't make the distinction between growth and self-enlightenment. I know when I'm growing, and I think that is a far more, for myself, a far more beneficial way of looking at it. I've said it in emails before when people ask me about self-enlightenment. But how do I get this? And I said, I don't know why you want this. Have you ever met anybody who says that they're self-enlightened? They're all assholes. And it's true. It's just like, I try to see yourself as growing. And that's it. If you can see yourself as getting larger. I love what you mentioned about that experience in India, where just when life seems so real and so lifelike, and we know these moments when they hit, and Colin Wilson has called them peak experience. Well, he got it from Maslow, but he called them peak experiences and searching for the peak experience. And for Colin Wilson, that was the point of life. And in some ways, I don't disagree with him. I just think it's a little unnuanced. But when life hits so hard and it's so joyous and it's just this upwelling, and you can feel yourself just getting bigger and larger, and you're in it. It is really the most amazing thing. Dara, I have to ask, because you are well-traveled, which place have you been to? I'm not asking you to give a pitch for this country or a certain area, but which place have you been to where you've just felt these moments, they were coming thick and fast, and you couldn't stop them. You just felt so magically involved.
Oh, that's a hard one. I think it's probably between, India and Turkey. Turkey, because of where I was, being in kind of Göbekli Tepe and Haran.
Yeah.
Feeling the sense of just antiquity, and it's Upper Mesopotamia. It's like the city that's mentioned. I was in Shanurfa. It's a city that's mentioned in the Bible, and
Right.
it's the birthplace of Abraham. Again, we talk about kind of like how broad your horizons are. Oh, I'm in a place where I thought only other people could go to.
Right.
That's the transformational thing. It's like, I'm in somewhere now. I'm in Göbekli Tepe. Most people just see Göbekli Tepe on a YouTube video. It's like,
Right.
but I'm here.
Yeah.
I made it here now, Truth be told, before obviously lockdown, all you had to do was get on a plane to do that.
Yeah.
Read like the things that you have to do to book that flight to go somewhere that might be a bit challenging to travel in. They're the really challenging bits.
Right.
To actually get there is very simple. I know that sounds moronic, but it's true. You just need to book a flight.
The world is a lot more flat than we think it is these days.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah,
that was incredible to be in that space. And like when I was in Gordon White's podcast, he made just tied Göbekli Tepe and Haran together in only the ways that Gordon can, with just this fantastic metaphor of like Göbekli Tepe was buried 12,000 years ago, and yet the Picatrix, which and Göbekli Tepe as a celestial observation and a celestial temple, not like 5 kilometers away, Haran, that center of learning where the Picatrix was written down. Again, looking at the stars and the same thing, and it's just like, and I never put those two together. And I was like, Jesus, you're right. That's incredible. Like what's happening in this area that over millennia, people are looking at the stars and really having a relationship with them. And that kind of sense of the vastness of time was amazing. India was different in the sense that 5 amazing things and 5 horrendous things can happen to you in any given day, in any order. It's almost a place of total novelty. Like anything can happen at any moment.
Right.
And I remember chatting to a guy who was driving tourists around to a different group than a small group that I was in, looking at some place in Rajasthan. I think just after I landed in India on my was a second trip there, and he was kind of chatting to me about it. Why are you here? And I'm like, well, I'm here. I want to take photographs, tell stories, that kind of stuff. And he just kind of made an offhand remark, and he just said, "All life is in India, everything." And then just walked away. And kind of like, it said this incredibly potent thing that like 10 years later I can still recall it because it had a massive impact in it. Because I remember as I traveled around, as I kind of was documenting stories, and he's right. He's so right. You have people living in a way that hasn't changed maybe for centuries, perhaps even millennia, right by side. The most high-tech skyscraper you can conceive of. And it truly was the thing. All life is in India. That's an overwhelming thought. Yeah. It's a special place and is a transformative place. It is for me. And I know it's kind of a hackneyed thing of like, going to India, man. No. And, but it is transformative, I think, again, that point of like, why do people get unhappy? And I think it's stagnation. Yeah. I think they're like it's stagnation, and that travel or being nomadic in some way liberates you from, And I think I think I'm quite nomadic in nature, particularly things like what I do for a living, or kind of where I live or how I travel, and I think that freshness helps stop stagnation in me personally, And I think we've just been stagnant. Yeah. We've been kind of closed off, and that stagnation is hurting people. As you said, beautifully earlier, like life is full of amazing, beautiful things. Growth. Growth for me is like, are you living a life full of adventure, full of novelty?
Absolutely.
Of wonder, but like is it fraught with risk and danger? Did you ever tell somebody that you loved them and had your heart broken, and equally did you go out and do it again and had that reciprocated, and it's like, again, we come back to like we're never finished. It's just that development process goes on. And that's okay. And I think that's okay. And explorations in magic in the world, the occult, I suppose to turn it on its head a bit, it's enriched my life. I think that's the true bit of transformation for me, is exploring in this world has enriched my life. I feel really, when I talk about the whole nomadic thing, some of that nomadic lifestyle is also a bit being unsettled. I genuinely feel like the magical community or the occult community broader is my tribe. And it's taken me quite late in life to find that.
Right.
I do feel that. And I think that's a lovely thing. I really like that.
Definitely.
And that's one of the transformative things for me as well.
Definitely. Our circle grows wider, and I don't want this to sound glib as well, but we're happy you made it, truthfully. And this goes for everybody, not just Dara. Is that, and I'm not talking as like some wise guy on a hill I've been doing this for 18 years, but it's one of those things. I don't care when you come to it, as long as you come to it. And I think there's a reason that a lot of us are doing it these days, because we're seeing a world of ash. We know that there's life there because we've had these moments and they exist, and we want more of them. And magic can certainly help in some way. Approached in a way that you feel is somewhat true to yourself. Definitely. When things like this get brought up in self-enlightenment, or even enlightenment in general, or self-transformation, a lot of people will think of things like gurus and stuff like that. I'm not to say that these people don't provide some kind of service for stuff like that, but I'm a pretty solo acting person. But I have to ask you, Dara, are there some figures that you look up to regarding something like self-transformation? Are there traditions and spiritual traditions besides that of magic, or even books that have been really important to you? I know books have an incredibly transformative element to them for me. They really do.
I think that there's definitely a number of figures that I do look up to, or certainly got an awful lot from their teaching or their work. People who just kind of not necessarily kind of are teachers, as it were, but just have something to say. They don't ask anything of you, but they just got something to say. Whether you kind of engage with that or not is up to you. Terence McKenna is a big one for me.
St. Terence, yeah.
Yes, indeed. I just found listening to him wonderful, particularly his kind of reflections on creation and as an artist and novelty. I found them expansive. They broadened my understanding, and they were kind of some of the areas where I started to really push my views of the world. And it was one of those kind of, when you talk about kind of those moments that kind of, again, crack the walls of reality. I had one particularly reading Terence McKenna. I was meditating, and I was thinking on this. I was working on this idea in my head, or I kind of had this idea of where we got a biosphere. This is 20 odd years ago. It's like the biosphere, there's atmosphere. What if there's like a noosphere? Except I was spelling it with a K. Right. So what if there's a noosphere, places like where we kind of ideas percolate, we somehow interact with them and draw them down, And literally the next day, I continued reading Terence McKenna's book. It was the Archaic Revival, his collection of his essays. Yeah. And then he was like talking about the noosphere with a G, and I'm like, I mean, it was just that kind of punch in the guts of like Uncle T tapping you on the shoulder, kind of like, here you go, son. Here you you keep reading. Right. And like that kind of exploration of that work, things like that happening that were wonderful and expansive. John Moriarty, the Irish philosopher, is a big one for me. And mysticism is I think my kind of natural space. I resonate very deeply with that, and how he looks at the world through the idea of mythos rather than logos. Really about the human need to tell stories. Right. And through storytelling, give meaning. He has some wonderful, wonderful passages in his work. I mean, it's truly, truly beautiful. A long time ago, I used to kind of like find his audio files from shonky interviews on like Irish radio and like make like crappy YouTube videos out of them. I got like kicked off YouTube in the process for about like 12 years ago. What? But it was worth it. It was worth it for
spread the love. Come on,
YouTube philosophy. Yeah, I can't remember in which piece he wrote this in, or indeed which interview he wrote it in. But a lot of his ideas were kind of like re-sacralizing the self and the world, but taking the logos out of oneself and kind of returning to dreamland. you know, and a very kind of Aboriginal concept, really, you know, and a lot of kind of his theses on things was, we've no more stories in the West. That's why nothing has meaning. We've got no more stories. There's no heart in the world. He described this beautiful passage where he was walking through either Connemara in the west of Ireland or County Kerry in the southeast. I can't remember them. I mean, they're both mountainous, kind of rugged landscape,
right.
and misty mountains with cloud wrapped in cloud wraiths. You know,
When you think of pastoral Ireland, you think of County Kerry,
all that kind of stuff, and. But he said he was walking across the bog, and a hare sprung up and just scattered out from under him. And he saw the imprint of where the hare had been sleeping, and he lay down and he put his head into it, and he prayed to the wild spirit, you know, to take the Western thought and education and conditioning, take it all out of his head and return him to this wild state. And that's something that stayed with me for a long time. You know, John Moriarty's work, I think that the mythos is so important. And I think that self-transformational way is writing your own story in one's own world. And, you know, that's when I talk about it, like, you know, my own personal mythology. That's what it is. That's that bit where I'm talking about. You can dress it up in kind of all kind of, you know, you know, Campbell stuff and of the hero's journey or whatever to me. And maybe that's the way of looking at it. But, you know, it's having a story that gives you meaning, you know. And he talked about place and wildness without in the landscape, but also wildness within. Yeah. You know, by wildness, he doesn't mean being reckless or kind of a nutcase. You know, it's just, as I was saying earlier, the organic state. It's the wildness. Mm-hmm. We're in a restricted space now as well, again, which just like literally and figuratively, but puts smaller cages around our wildness. For me, that's a big thing. For finding that organic space, that wildness, wherever you can, is really important.
Is there one book? I mean, it's such a tough, silly question, but is there like one book where you was just like, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but was there a book where you had a moment where every single part of this book or this text or something that you were reading was just speaking straight to you, like a bolt from heaven? Was John Moriarty, you think, as close as you get, or?
Yeah, John Murray, he's definitely up there. It may have been, the Archaic Revival, that collection of essays by Terence McKenna. I think that was very, very potent. Graham Hancock's work on consciousness as well. I think it's called Supernatural.
Great, great book.
Yeah,
I love that book.
Yeah, that's quite a potent one. You know, for me, it always goes back to nature. You know, and looking at what Terence McKenna is saying and what Graham Hancock was saying in that book about kind of entheogens and natural medicines. I think about particular things like the Archaic Revival is, you know, just the theme of that title resonates with me as well. Yeah, I think I'd be quite happy in a very archaic time to some degree.
Right.
It's complete fantasy. I'd probably be dead if I was at that time now. Great grandfather at 36. You know, I'm a lot older than 36, I might add. But in terms of formative changing how I saw the world, I think Terence McKenna, John Moriarty, and Graham Hancock, that work particularly from Graham Hancock is in there as well. There's another writer, a guy called Michael Dames, if I recall correctly, and he wrote a book called Mythic Ireland. And it's going back to that theme of myth and meaning through kind of looking at the kind of the megalithic work and some of the kind of later Celtic work and the stories around the kind of the myth cycles of Ireland. He transposed meaning onto the landscape and talked about kind of like the provinces where the original was 5 provinces, there was a central province and there's 4 provinces around it. The centre of Ireland, the idea of there was a navel of Ireland called the Hill of Uisneach, you know, which was a meeting place, and a kind of Baltana, the largest fires would be lit there, and kind of they would go out from there in kind of in large kind of concentric circles. It would almost look like a fiery eye if observed from above the whole island.
Nice.
He kind of talked about, again, Ireland in a mythic sense, you know, through the cycles of the provinces representing the seasons, depending on kind of where they were, east to west, and the west from the autumn where the sun sets and begins to die as being autumn or fall, and the north representing the winter, and he transposed that kind of mythology across the topography, and it was a beautifully done book. And one again that stayed with me as well. There's a mountain in the west of Ireland called Croagh, known locally as the Reek. And it's a total kind of pyramidic structure, like not structure, pyramidic. It isn't a structure; it's a mountain. But it's quite striking to see it rises out of the landscape. This perfect pyramid. There's always been kind of religious significance around it. For the last kind of 100 years or so, it's a thing of penance. So it's like on I think it's the last Sunday of July, the first Sunday of August, I can't remember which, people do a pilgrimage, but 8,000 people would go up and down this mountain. It's really scree covered mountain. It's it's not high in terms of the mountains like you guys get in North America, but it's a tough enough hike. It's very steep, and there's a church at the top, and people do the Stations of the Cross on the way up, and it would have been tradition, as is in a lot of Catholic ways. The best way to show one's reverence for God is by
hurting yourself.
Hurting yourself and self-harming. So people would go up barefoot, or they'd crawl up the mountain. It's deeply unpleasant. As a form of penance. The mountain itself is where Patrick spent 40 days. Nights emulating Jesus in the desert, 40 days and nights away from everybody in solitude, and cast from there the snakes out of Ireland and down below into Clúbe in County Mayo. And there's a church up there and all that kind of stuff. But it's obviously a far, far older site, right? Yeah. It's a super old site. There's kind of remnants of early Iron Age forts and like pre-Celtic stuff up there. But what's really interesting about it is up to kind of just after the famine, like kind of 1860, 1870, there's historical references to, again, the same period of time. People go up and down the mountain, but they weren't doing it for penance. They were doing it for encouraging fertility. So couples who were struggling to have children would then come down the mountain. And then it was kind of an open air, kind of like Woodstock, everyone just kind of going for it, au natural, kind of like everyone's just going for it, trying to conceive children, You look at that and say that has very little to do with Christianity, right? So in the 80s, I can't remember the name of the archaeologist, but he was going around megalithic sites in Ireland, because obviously we have Newgrange in the Boyne Valley, where the winter solstice, the passage grave is illuminated. Right. It's an incredible site. But he was exploring areas around Ireland where there are similar kind of megalithic carvings. And one of the biggest areas is a place called the Boulay Stone, which is about 8 kilometers east of Croagh. And it's got all the kind of the scooped out bowls, the spirals, all this kind of stuff on a cliff face. And they were trying to figure out, well, these usually have some sort of kind of astronomical significance, marking the punctuations of the year, the solstice and what have you. He camped out, and he kind of went back and visited that site. And then what he figured out is that twice a year, on the kind of some of those halfway marks, again, the August, in between the solstice, the sun rolls down the side of Croagh.
Cool.
Right. Directly from that point where the Boulay Stone is. And coincidentally, there is an area there which is known as St. Patrick's Chair. So, so again, the people would have known about this for a long time, but kind of it had been lost through history. But this site had huge significance. This is where Michael Dames was talking about this site, is he was referring to kind of, again, the provinces representing kind of a hero rising and a hero defeating. He was talking about kind of what's his name? Balor of the one eye, Balor of the evil eye. So he only had one eye, and he could kind of shoot this, dramatic kind of laser out of it. But saying that the solitary sun as it dies in the west is symbolic of Balor's eye, and kind of that his power receding, and giving away to winter. And it's I love that idea of the mythology tied up in the landscape, tied up in the cosmos. That sense of expanse and mystery, and there's something beyond us. Magic gives me a lot of that, but it's that kind of sense of place and mystery that's very much a joyous thing to me.
I'm going to divert the conversation here for a second, because I think this is important and not a lot of people talk about it specifically in magical podcasts. And it's also to go back with this idea of climbing Reek for conception reasons. For a lot of, I'm just going to use the word normal because there's no better way of putting it, but for more normal people, most of them will say that the most transformative moment of their life was a birth of a child. And I can't really speak to this too much at this point. I do not have children yet. But for yourself, Dara, how did you have to change? Or did you, in fact, change in some way, do you think, with the birth of your children?
Yeah, definitely. Hugely. I mean, it's definitely been true for me. And I think one of the biggest things that you really receive in terms of changing how you see the world is it turns your parents into people for you.
Oh, really?
Because when we talk about kind of a lot of kind of what we're dealing with, it's like a lot of it goes back to, well, my mum and my dad did this, or I had some sort of family experience, and it was just, your parents fuck you up, right?
Right.
When you have a kid of your own, all of a sudden you see your mum and dad as like just people trying to figure this out.
Right.
And that's a tremendously healing thing. It's a tremendously healing thing because you go, oh my God, they were just feeling their way in the dark like we are. They're just people. That was the big transformative thing for me. Was a kind of like, I let go of a lot of kind of, I think retrospectively say the unfair standards that I might have held my parents to.
Okay. That
dissolved. Being a dad, is brilliant. It's great. It's absolutely great. It's hilarious. It's moving. It's knackering. And it's tough.
Right.
It's really tough. Really hard in places.
Yeah.
I think a lot on social media, people popularize going like, that a lot of people feel the pressure or expectation to have children, kind of resist against that, and that's an understandable position. Kids are awesome. Kids are great. They're tough. They're hard work.
Yep.
It is 100% real talk. Like it is like you're in the big leagues now.
Right.
And but you see yourself again, as I say, I saw myself and I saw my dad as a man trying to figure things out.
Right.
And keep his family going, because I knew that's what I was trying to do.
Right.
So I understood that, and I, like I said, I kind of dissolved that barrier of being son and parent and expectation, and equally from my mom. So it was very healing in that respect.
Huh.
I understand duty in a different way, an obligation in a different way.
Okay.
I understand the impact of my actions. I monitor a lot more about what I say and what I do around my kids. Go. I mean, they'll repeat it, So like that's one thing you have to be very wary of.
Right.
And then they start dropping words that they shouldn't be saying, that kind of thing. Always with amazing comic timing. But
always.
You really do kind of think about, what does this experience mean for them? What will this give? And really, that's important. And totally seeing your own failings. That's the biggest thing for me. As you, we often see relationships, again, when you've got that sense of clarity as the mirror that's showing you this and this bit you're really shit at, and you need to work. Relationships do show you that.
Right.
When you get to the point of like, what do all these people have in common now, that they keep doing the same thing to me? Why do I keep attracting all these people that keep having the same problems come up?
Right.
What's the common denominator? When you figure out that, oh yeah, it's me.
That's me.
That's what the common denominator is. People keep telling me, because I keep doing the same shit. Like, it's equally that with children.
Okay.
You're kind of going, because they say, why, but you did that, Daddy. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right. So there's a lot of kind of like self-reflection. It's not even self-reflection. It's kind of like, it's not reflection. It's kind of being projected directly at you with a cinematic 70 mil camera
It's like ancient Egypt. You have your Ka is like literally right there, right beside you, just screaming at you all the time.
100%. Yeah. It is a very, very transformative experience. You actually understand the nature of responsibility more than anything else.
Okay.
The level of responsibility that is quite frightening at times.
Yeah.
Quite frightening at times, quite overwhelming at times. It's massive. It's massive.
How does your magic enter into it? Is being a dad and doing magic, man? Like, do you do some things differently? What happens?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's quite comedic as well. Like, this has happened frequently of like just daily practice, like doing the lesser banishing ritual. Why are you talking to the Ninja Turtles? Daddy's talking to the Ninja Turtles again. When I going through the archangels, like there's the Raphael, like I mean that.
Where's Donatello? Where's Leonardo?
It's hard to stay in the moment.
Yeah,
you're getting these questions. I'm also I'm very cautious of the type of work that I would do.
Okay.
I deliberately do not do spirit work.
Yeah.
Specifically for the reason there were kind of young, vulnerable kids in the house. I do not do anything, who are extremely sensitive and perceptive. I mean, kids are always seeing things floating around the room, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very, very cautious of that. How it probably manifests in different ways is there's probably kind of more prophylactic magical things that are protecting my family that say in the average home. But one interesting thing for me is I see the kind of chthonic energy in particularly one of my children already.
Really?
100%.
No.
This is actually one of the things when kind of that I really loved when you were on Spirit Box. Kind of, when I asked you kind of what were those kind of like formative things, you were like, I was born, and I feel it's very similar for him.
Yeah.
But he just has this draw towards the Gothic, and he dressed up as Baron Zamadi by himself without any encouragement from me at all.
You were mentioning the story after we had the mics off for Spirit Box, but if you want to share it, I'd be delighted.
It's like, Daddy, come here, I want to have a look at this. So like, it's like kind of a skull mask from Halloween. Endlessly talks about Halloween, and
nice.
We just bought a Hoover. He opened the box. He's 6, so he opened the Hoover box or vacuum, and had cut a little window out of it, so it was like you could see it. He's like, okay, what's that? He's like, it's a coffin. Now watch this. Has a plastic top hat. Puts on a skull mask, puts the top hat on, and lies down and puts his arms across his chest.
Yeah.
In a coffin.
Nice.
And I'm like, where did you see that? Where did you see that? At this point, I was expecting him to get up and just show me a picture of Baron Zamadi's Veve that he just drawn out of nowhere. It was remarkable.
Yeah.
And I was just like, where did you get this from? Like, and I've again no idea. But he's talking about magic and a wizard and all that kind of stuff, and it's like that to me is probably his calling.
Yeah.
Like he's talking about that kind of stuff now, and again going back to that kind of idea of like, what's my wild organic state? And I think for most of us, it's when you're 6 or 7, what did you want to be?
Yeah.
What did you really enjoy? What did you just want to do all the time? That's whatever that thing is that you wanted to do all the time. You probably still want to do some variation of that now.
Truth.
I don't think we changed that much.
No.
And I think that's the root of a lot of sadness in people, is that we're not doing that thing. We're not in that. So we're doing something completely perpendicular to it. And that makes us die inside, sometimes quite slowly and quite sadly. And fundamentally, it's that returning to that wild organic state of wonder and exploration. And it is that kind of process of transformation and growth where you go through all these stages and then kind of go back to being actually really
100%.
I wanted to kind of do what I wanted to do when I was 7. That actually I don't feel that different in terms of what brings me joy.
I get emails from people asking me, like, how do I be a better magician? And as I said on Spirit Boxes, like, I don't give the best answers to these emails, and I'm actually pretty terrible at it. But when I get these emails specifically, I say, well, truthfully, you were the best magician you ever were when you were 5 years old.
Mm.
And that's something I truly believe. First of all, take a little bit of the pressure off of yourself. Like, you don't need to constantly be striving up the tree of life or whatever model that you're using magic for, because guess what? You'll never be as great as you were when you were 5. And that sounds like a really, really, really terribly sly answer, but I do definitely think it's true. Watching children, my mother was in early childhood education. I was constantly surrounded by kids, and every age, I was constantly shocked by just how magical they were. Like they could do, and not in like the way that they would sit in a sandbox and conjure things or talk to friends, but their whole way of operating was capturing wonder, right? And I love that. I think what you're going towards, Dara, is entirely true. This idea that at base, we kind of all circle back to the things that we wanted when we were these young magicians.
Yeah. A lot of the complexity around those desires falls away into just kind of, I like this.
Yeah.
I enjoy this. This is a better place. And I think that's, for me, the fundamental point of anything. Doesn't matter what you're doing, what tradition.
Right.
It's like, are you better for it?
Yeah.
You know, and if you are, then fuck me, that's great. You know, brilliant.
For sure.
You know, that's it. And kind of the other response, you know, to the response of, like, you know, to people go, magic's bullshit, it doesn't work. You're deluding yourself. It's like, if I'm a happier person, why do you care?
Yeah. What's
the difference between this and are you just neurolinguistically, programming yourself?
Right.
Why does it matter to you? You know, it's like,
get out of my house.
If my internal world is improved by it, then that's good. And also, if I'm not projecting something onto somebody else, then grand, obviously that's an important reflection. But it's that sense of wonder, and I think that's I suppose really the truth about it. It's taken us a while to get there. What transformative bits did magic give me? And in terms of the question you gave about, like, what are the vectors of transformation? It's like, what gives me a sense of wonder, and that wonder that dissolves my conditioning. That those things have been monumentous in my life, and then that constant reflection of, like, I'm not the finished piece. There'll be regressions, there'll be areas that will newly arise that need work, and need digesting and fermentation and all that kind of stuff, right, to be transmutated.
Love it, Dara. That's fantastic. Now, I do have to ask this because it does happen. I mean, it happened with myself. I know I get a lot of emails about this because it's something it's one moment that I'm not ready to talk about on my podcast yet. I don't know if I ever will, but it was an oh fuck moment. And this is a moment where it's basically where everything has to change. Something happens to you, and it's not just like a really wacky drug trip. It's like every single bit of what you thought the world was, or every conception that you had, is completely wrong, or just it was a lattice of deception for yourself, and it falls away in one moment of your life. Again, I call these oh fuck moments, otherwise known as everything can change moments. Has this ever happened to you, Dara? Have you had one moment where it's like, I don't know if I'm the same person after this, or I know I'm not the same person after this?
Yeah.
How do I adjust?
For me, there's kind of two types of that. I like the moment bit where it's an experience, and I'll get to that. But the other bit is a reflection, and that takes a long time to get to sometimes. But I think some of the most important reflections in my life have been, as I kind of joked earlier about repeated cycles in relationships with different people, and that reflection of, like, it's me.
Right.
That people keep telling me the same thing because it's something that I'm doing, my behavior or my character. That has been a kind of a shattering thing, you know, where you kind of realize I'm not as perfect as I think I am, or as flawless as I think I am, or you know, the maligned innocent party in some of these kind of, you know, emotional journeys we go on with people, where I realized what a hugely contributing factor I had been to some challenging moments or things that went, you know, things that had potential that didn't manifest, you know, and sadness for those things. And you kind of realizing that the contribution one had. Sometimes that's not obvious. Sometimes that takes a while. So I think that's one part of it. Now, to the more kind of dramatic kind of, you know, oh, holy shit moment, the no moment. And I call it the apocalypse moments, you know.
Sure.
For me, there have been a few particular ones. One major one was definitely in India when I did the story on the jinn, because I had a nightmare before I went, which I've mentioned on different podcasts before, where I was in kind of a Sufi celebration area at a kind of a, you know, an Asian looking place, an India looking place, and I looked to my left and a figure kind of had its back of its head to me with like kind of just a simple white turban, and just turned and looked at me, and it was a kind of a decomposed face with a snake coming out of one eye, and it just said, "Don't come here," right? And I woke up, and this is like 2 weeks before I was due to fly to India to shoot the stuff on Jane, and then I ended up like didn't get much better from there. It's like, you know, it's like my camera broke in the catastrophic way, like my dad's tooth broke in the airport. We got like just so much pain. Changed hotel 3 times in 2 days. Just like all horror stories. But then when I got to the one of the sites I was shooting for this area that was mentioned in the book, City of Jinns by William Dalrymple, it's a place called Nizamuddin Alia Darg, which is it's a tomb of a very famous Sufi saint, Nizamuddin, and that was the place.
Yeah.
So I walked into that place. I'm like, this is the place for my dream.
Yeah.
That's where I was 2 weeks ago, where the jinn told me, don't come here.
And now I'm here.
Yeah, and now I'm here, and I was jarred. And then, you know, I was definitely I was on edge.
Right.
And then my fixer, who I was with, was talking to the Sufi caretakers, and they kind of led me over to a little enclosure. And it's a beautiful site, and Nizamuddin is gorgeous. It's just kind of like white marble, kind of little enclave through the kind of windy, chaotic lanes of old Delhi, and this little enclave, like lattice stonework. You can see people kind of sitting down, holding their heads, and kind of lying down, prone on the ground. So that's where the people who have jinn problems are, waiting to be seen.
Yeah.
And when I looked up at the area, there was a man kind of sitting down, and he was just kind of catching my eye, glaring at me, and kind of laughing manically. And I had cold sweats.
Yeah.
I literally was like, my foot was nailed to the floor, and I was just like, fuck, you know, and I was just like, don't come here, you know, and I was like, am I going to get possessed? You know, because I know in my guts I'm looking at someone who's possessed.
Yeah.
You know, and my fixer, who's a very talented photographer in his own right, is like, so you want to take the shot, and we can go, you know, just be a bit discreet, and let's go. And I was like, no, I know, you know, but yeah, and he was looking at me. He was like, dude, what are you doing? You know, it's like you've flown 3,000 miles to get here, and you're like hesitating on the shot. And I was like, yeah, well, I'll take the shot too. And I was genuinely framing up the shot. Normally, when I do photography, like I don't feel anything, you know, because I photographed a lot of subject matter that people find quite challenging. I photographed, you know, like brain autopsies and like the Ogre, like drinking whiskey out of skulls, leprosy wars, you know, stuff that a lot of people would find challenging. This is the only moment where I was literally shaking taking a picture.
Yeah,
because I was like, is this going to cost me something that I can never get back? You know, like, and I took the photograph in the end, and I was shaking for a long time, because I felt like I'd just kind of seen the impact of jinn possession, you know, and that story was the start of me really starting to talk about and research into the world of spirits and folklore, all that stuff,
Awesome.
and kind of, that kind of a lecture around that work became a YouTube video that eventually became the first episode of the podcast. I think it's the first episode of the podcast. Yeah. But that kind of went from there, and then kind of more recently doing what essentially is the most basic entry-level noob Luddite energy meditation resulted in some pretty intense visions.
Yeah.
When we talk about having kind of kids in the house,
right?
I stopped there and then.
Yeah.
Was kind of direct contact.
Listen,
should we say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, escape, abort. Those are certainly kind of, those oh no moments. Generally the ones where I have a cold sweat.
Right, yeah.
They're the ones that result in me kind of shaking afterwards and go, fucking hell.
It's funny that you bring up the reflection, because upon reflection of these moments, they almost seem, it's not like you're dulling them in some way, but you're just trying to make sense of them. But you know for sure that something has changed, and you can't fake it in any way.
Yeah. You really can't, and it fundamentally changes. And I remember I would go for kind of periods of long travel and then kind of go to periods of, say, contract work.
Right.
Coming back from, say, shooting things like the Agori, Hindu sect. And I remember being in a meeting about a particularly dull product and one that I was kind of be working on creating some experience around it and going kind of, 2 months ago, I was watching a dude drink whiskey out of a human skull. What the fuck am I doing here?
Right.
That's the transformative stuff. It's like, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
I can't listen to your marketing plan.
No.
You might as well just be flapping your lips. It's just, I don't exist in this world anymore. And it's hard to be in it.
I'd rather be with the skull drinkers.
Yeah, totally. That's more real to me.
Right.
This is like, this is some sort of weird pantomime I'm in, I've got to pretend to care about this fucking bullshit, and that's a hard bit. That's one of the tricky ones about the transformation is that, like, you can't exist in what you used to exist in.
Right.
What was comfortable can become painful and restricting. And certainly that was because my travel has always been wrapped up in, there's always been some extreme element to it,
right.
And it's always been extreme exploration, particularly with my own spirituality and the other, when you come back from these places, it's like, oh, that sounds wonderful. You're learning yoga. I'm like, no, I was hanging out with necromancers. That was basically what I was doing,
Perfect. I love
it. That thing, and you just live. You realize that I just live in a different world.
Yeah.
But equally, a lot of magic folk do as well. They just live in a different world.
Yeah, I know. I do.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard to operate in both. Sometimes it's a real challenge.
Very much so, for sure. Dara, just to wrap up here. Personally, I don't think that self-transformation is the point of magic. It is a part of magic. But I want to ask you, in some way, do you think that self-transformation is maybe the point of us now? That's our task. Like, is this? Yeah. I don't want to use the word meaning of life, but the main driving reason that we're here. Would you say that?
I personally believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think you're right. It isn't the point of magic. It's a factor. Magic is a factor in our overall stories. And for me, it is growth and transformation is the point of it all. I can't give it a looser definition. It has to have a super loose definition.
It does.
Yeah, I think that's where it's at. Yeah, yeah. I think it has to be.
Fantastic, Dara. This has been ridiculous. I can't believe we've been recording for 2 hours, man. It's been such a pleasure. For myself, and I'm just gonna put a little cap on this. I don't think that self-transformation is the point of magic. It became the point of magic for me for a little while And I always found that I was coming up short in each and every time. And that came with a lot of the Thelema, that came with a lot of Golden Dawn-based magic. I found that when I just resigned myself to the fact that it wasn't the point of magic or the major driving force of magic, magically, I started transforming. When I let go of the idea of self-transformation was when I saw my biggest period of time of self-transformation. And I'm in that right now. And it's really quite beautiful. It's definitely one of those things that I think if you come to magic thinking that it is going to solve all of your problems, that it is going to make you the best person you can be, that you will get every single one of the things that you want as opposed to the things that you need, I don't know if you're magicking right. And I think that there was definitely something where I made a decision to just go to magic for the things that old-timey magicians used to do, strange ways of seeing the world, finding treasure, like talking to the dead, talking to spirits. That's when I started transforming. And that's really where I saw my best gains. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all, Dara, but
I think that you've beautifully encapsulated things there. And I think that the phrase you used of letting go is bang on. I think that's such an important reflection and an important terminology to use. You know, when I talk about like just laughing, that's what I'm describing. I'm describing and letting go. Let go. Go become your organic wild state.
It's such a because it's used in movies. I'm thinking of Let Go Luke from the very first Star Wars. This stuff, in a way, it's kind of true. It's not that you don't have to have it as an ambition in your life. You can. But just constantly trying to seek it, it does fall to a certain kind of spiritual materialism, dare I say, spirit consumerism. Like, and I felt that when I kept it as an ambition, but left it as something to just happen, it did. And that's magic.
Yeah. I think you summed that up beautifully.
I have to know what else do you have? You've got how many people have launched sigils with the Sigil engine?
Oh Jesus! I think we're close to 1 million now. I think we might have hit 1 million now. That's been insane.
Yeah.
First sigil we did was we want this to a successful launch for this to be successful. And
guess what?
Yeah.
Can you describe for people that don't know yet about the Sigil engine? I hope they do, but if you don't know about the Sigil engine, Dara, if you want to just explain it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. The Sigil engine really came from an inflamed, passionate conversation over a fair few pints with a friend of mine who's a creative technologist. Me just exploring the idea of like how could magic work straight up in code through technology? Could it work? Is it possible? You know, and kind of I was playing with that idea for a while and kind of thinking about the transition of things from like, we look at the kind of, in Peter Carroll's Lee Null, and he has the family tree of the magical schools inside the some of the first leaves. When you go from kind of like shamanism and through all the way down into kind of like ritual magic and what have you.
Right.
So, in there's progressions of technology.
Yes.
There's learning. There's the spoken word. There's the evolution of from spoken word to written word to handwritten word to printing press to print on demand.
Right.
And so, if we can do all these kind of things, why can't we just do direct digital interface? There's always just a transition in technology, and I imagine there's always been a tension in that transition with technology where the people who are handing down things kind of orally are like, whoa, no, these guys writing stuff down are just these crazy kids, they don't know what they're doing. I kind of feel like I kind of riffed on that a little bit, and we kind of decided, well, let's try it. So we built a couple of prototypes, played around with it, and as we were going through it, I wanted to really start to play around with particularly kind of thelemic ideas, of the idea of kind of like the vast empty expanse of Nui where all things come from, and then kind of like the creation of the sigil was in a sense the process was kind of a prayer to Babylon. And it's just really simple. It's sigilengine.com. You type in your intention and it will create a sigil for you. You can't replicate the same thing twice. It sets the pace.
Cool.
The points in the circle are based on the speed you type. the frequency of letters.
I didn't know that. That's what? Really?
Yeah.
That's insane.
we really went through it as it's extremely protracted, as we were trying to go to a point like, it won't repeat it. You can't repeat the same thing.
Amazing.
And then we kind of filter that through magical text and reference of the volume of letters. We do all this kind of mad shit to establish a chain, a data string, and that worked through points around the circle.
Cool.
So it's like a blend of your traditional kind of sigil creation of stripping out vowels and repeated letters, and then kind of, but for execution we kind of do a Kama model, and that we go from point to point.
Got it.
Nothing to do with any planets, but we made it into a circle, just as kind of like to be honest, it was a stylistic decision in that it worked better when we were rendering it, and we felt it was kind of a nice nod to the Goethe as well. That's where it came from.
Awesome.
Well, I've had people in their 70s write to me going, I tried your sigil thingy and I needed money, and the next day my son sent me money unprompted. So it's bringing, again, it all goes back to sigils.
Right. Starting with your sigil first.
Which again, and like Sigil Engine totally comes from that Grant Morrison.
Amazing.
That's exactly where it comes from.
Perfect.
I think I mentioned him in the Q&A.
Yeah.
But we're looking to make an app. We're going to make an app out of it now. Yeah.
Absolutely. Dara, that's not all that you do, though. You have, in my opinion, one of the finest occult podcasts out there called Spirit Box Podcast. I plugged it enough on your show. I want to plug it a little bit on mine. This is a podcast that I wish I had 15 years ago. The people that you talk to are the kind of people that I really wanted to listen to. I think at that point where I started to switch from chaos magic to, I'll just say, gift shop magic. I love everybody that you have on there. Joshua Cushon, you've got Phil Hine on there. Just some of the most wonderful people on your show. Tell people about Spirit Box if they've not listened. I try to plug your show as much as possible because I really love it. And your Patreon content, the exclusive material that you leave out of not leave out, but the material that you have for the extended interviews are always so awesome. So why did you start Spirit Box? And tell us more about why Spirit Box was something you felt you had to do.
Well, firstly, can I just thank you so much for your ongoing encouragement and support. It means a huge lot, but it particularly means a lot, coming from you. And as I said, I was listening to your show before I even kind of thought of the idea of Spirit Box. So it's
crazy.
Yeah. So it's that means an awful lot. Thank you, Douglas. I really do.
Always.
It really came from, I was just kind of making these disjointed videos on YouTube, talking about the jinn, talking about what kind of like waza means, in terms of like the whispering of demons, and counterpointing Christian ideas with Islamic ideas, and then kind of fairies and fairy lore, and the huge array of kind of similarities between the jinn and the fairy world, and which are just remarkable. Yeah. I mean, it's just insane the amount of kind of like just bullseyes again and again and again. But people said, somebody just randomly commenting in between all the usual kind of like like abusive comments on YouTube.
First,
fuck you, man. I'm like, all right, Jesus.
Yeah, thank you.
You don't have to watch the video.
No.
People were kind of saying like, this would make a great podcast, and I did really. And the idea of Spirit Box was just it was just a riff on the Spirit Box, the idea of that kind of device to interface and try and communicate with spirits. And I kind of like the fact that the Spirit Box is picking up different kind of radio signals, and does it mean something, does it not mean something, or or what are these kind of electronic voices that are coming through. I like that idea as kind of a nice kind of creative envelope for it. But that was it. It was just kind of it was a vehicle for me to talk to really, cool, inspiring people who are doing really interesting things and have knowledge to bring. Yourself and the show you did, like from a very kind of like spiritual point of view, my Spirit Box is my service to others.
Yeah.
But it's also totally selfish because I get to talk to people as well and kind of ask all the questions that I want to ask.
I hear you.
So I get like, basically an hour and a half to ask questions of people with remarkable experiences and remarkable accomplishments and remarkable stories.
Yeah.
And I get to ask them the most naive, dumbass questions and they answer them.
They're great questions. What do you know?
But that's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
That it's a fantastic thing, and I'm really lucky that people have enjoyed it and like the show. I think it's an amazing thing, and like I was saying about feeling like I found my tribe. It's one of those spaces it's given me a huge amount. Doing the podcast is a creative endeavor that I've enjoyed so much.
I got to ask though, Dara, because I get asked this question by a lot of my friends because I'm very busy with my podcast. It takes up pretty much most of my waking hours, if not all of them. Does it feel like work to you yet, though, the podcast?
It started to before Christmas. I was doing like 4 shows a month, so kind of one a week.
Yeah.
And I started to realize that I just can't maintain this,
yeah.
As well as the Patreon. And I dropped it to 3 shows. And I stopped really killing myself over kind of, I got to get the schedule. It has to be and then because then I started to, I didn't want to get to a point where I'm focusing on frequency instead of quality and it being, just a good show. So I think one of the bits I feel kind of differently now is responsibility,
right.
and it's like my gratitude to people who listen, particularly the patrons, to doing stuff that they'll enjoy and get a lot from. Yeah, just continue to try and do good stuff, and
can I interrupt you? Great stuff. It's a great podcast. I really, really enjoy it, man. And again, I don't know why I ignored it for a little while until Aidan Wachter basically said, you should check out this podcast called Spirit Box. And I actually looked at your little tagline and it said magic, spirits, and folklore. And I was like, spirits, okay, let's check it out. And it was love at first listen. It's like, man, this is great. I just love that these guys are talking about this great stuff. And there's this really wonderful way that a lot of them share these experiences, which are really quite incredible. And it's not until you get the Patreon stuff that it's just like, well, okay, this is even more. Tell me more, Dr. Jack Hunter. I need to know more. And it's really quite wonderful. Everybody, please listen to Spirit Box. I really love the show, and join the Patreon if you can. Dara does fantastic work. Dara, I'm just going to say this one thing, and I don't want you to respond. Perhaps a second podcast just about you talking about Irish folklore, because when you were sharing that story about Reek, I was enthralled. So I know you've got a lot of work to do, but another podcast, that would be amazing. And it's not just your Irish accent. I mean, Irish accents are the best of the accents in the world, but I will have links up to everything that Dara gets up to. That will include a link to the Sigil engine, as well as a link to both the Patreon and the regular Spirit Box podcast. Check both out. They're wonderful. And again, yes, I am a patron of Spirit Box. Those will be in the show notes at whatmagicisthis.com, as well as other show notes. Truthfully, with this one, there's not going to be a ton because I think that this stuff, it's not really in any books. I don't think that you can really guide yourself through A to B to C steps for something as personalized as self-transformation. But there will be some links to some of the things that we talked about in this episode, as well as some other stuff that I can find in the show notes at whatmagicisthis.com. Also there, you'll find links to my Twitter account, my Facebook account, as well as my Instagram account. I'm pretty active on Twitter, less so with Instagram and Facebook. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review for me on iTunes or Stitcher, any place that you can. People do read those reviews. They really, really do. I know that the whole star clicky thing, that's nice and it's wonderful. Keep those coming as well, but people actually do read the reviews. So if you have something nice to say about me, please write something down. If you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, and then they'll tell a friend, and then perhaps they'll tell a friend. Word of mouth is kind of the way that I like the marketing side of What Magic Is This? I think that if you could tell a friend if you enjoy the show, and they'll go from there, and hopefully we'll get more people interested in this whole magic, occult, paranormal, supernatural, etc., thing that I like to talk about on this podcast. If you really enjoy the podcast and you'd like to support the show, you can do so at Patreon. That is patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. This is basically my job. This is what I do. I mean, pretty much almost all of my waking hours go into the research, the writing, the promotion, the creating of every aspect of What Magic Is This. It's right there. And so if you can find a way to support the show, best way of doing that is through Patreon. I put up exclusive content every month. And they're not just like short 20-minute episodes. They're hour-long episodes. I try to keep them at about an hour. And they're about all kinds of awesome stuff, like entities to grimoires to my own personal way that I approach magic and the things that I do. It's all there in the Patreon, $7 a month. I don't have any other tiers except for the $7 one. It's you support the show or you don't, but only if you can. But if you can, it would be greatly appreciated. Yes, this is my life, and I want it to continue being a huge part of my life, if not my entire life. Well, maybe not my entire life, but you get my drift anyways. If you don't like the $7 a month thing, but you'd still like to support, please head to whatmagicisthis.com and click on the PayPal Me buttons that are all over the place. You can donate any amount of money that you feel you can afford to. That's $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, $200 a month. Any amount is appreciated greatly. So yes, PayPal me. Otherwise, Patreon. With the PayPal stuff, you do not get the extra content. So I'm just going to say that's the best deal, $7 a month. That's my pitch. And I've ran it up the flagpole, and I hope a couple of people will salute it. All of those things, Twitter, show notes, Patreon, are available at whatmagicisthis.com. Dara, this has been so much fun. I wish that if I was to ask you to come back on the show at some point, you would.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, no problem at all. Be delighted to.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for making me so welcome. It's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
I know. It's kind of weird. Like, am I talking to Dara next week? I'm not. Rats. Shit. But I wish only the best for you and for Spirit Box and the Sigil engine. And it's been such a wonderful time having you here. I hope people got a little something out of this, because this is a topic that you can make an entire podcast about self, and people have, and they're not very good. So I hope that with this way that we looked at magic and self-transformation, it's helped some people in some ways, from two very different people, but they both enjoy magic. So that's the show, everybody. And I want you all to come back to What Magic Is This? We're going to talk about some more of this crazy letting go of the things that you think you want, but really just to allow yourself to get the things that you actually need and deserve. Until then, I want you all to stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous. We will talk at you soon. Can we get a goodbye from you, Dara?
Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening.
And listen to Spirit Box, please. And until then, take care, everybody. Stay luminous and stay healthy. Bye-bye. Bye.